last week's Parsha Shlach. This was amazing. We're the annual cycle Parsha, not the triennial cycle. If you want to know about the triennial cycle, we spoke about chapters in Bereshis. We had put up a video about that. Last week, there were signs going up around the Yishuv that they were having a special Shabbos dedicated to discussing the laws of Yishuv Aretz, Avat Aretz, as they say, and why it is important that we settle the land, especially Gaza, why it's part of our religious beliefs that the Gaza Strip one day, once again, become part of settled Jewish Israel. That's something the local rabbi believed we should emphasize on Parsha Shlach. Sounds like a good idea, right? Why? Because Shlach is when we read about how 10 out of 12 major Jewish leaders made the editorial decision that it was not in Am Yisrael's interest to want to conquer and settle the land of Israel, right? It was the repudiation of Kibush, Gerut, and Hityashvut. By the way, comes Fagin's slogan. The rabbi added teshuvah, repentance, right? Repentance. First, you have to repent. You can't do it out of secularism. You have to do it for the right reasons. So those are all sins, by the way. Kibush, Gerush, and Hityashvut are considered sins by people who subscribe to so-called international law. Of course, we can't conquer, occupy other lands. Can't do that. You definitely can't drive out your enemy or settle on his land afterwards. Those are all three sins. For us, those are mitzvahs. So there you go. That's the dichotomy here. It shows that we're not thinking distinct language. Their religion, which prohibits kibush, gerush, and hityashvut, is not our religion. And if they claim that in the name of God, they're not speaking God's name. It's either a false God or they're lying. Okay. So, as he said it, the Sabbath was dedicated to understand the fallacy of the public policy against Aliyah settlement. Now, the rabbi was here on Shabbos morning after the early minyan, and he got to speak about a little bit of this, and he gave his spiel. He was very impassioned. And he pointed out something. I think it was, who said this? I don't know the exact one he quoted, but this formulation is that the spies were supposed to gather information, reconnaissance, and they're maybe supposed to express their opinion about how to go about conquering the land, right? It was supposed to be about how to do so. Now, why do I say express their opinion? Because Moshe Rabbeinu didn't ask them for their opinion, but considering who they were, if there was ever going to be a discussion about how, then they probably would have spoken because we know who these people were. They were people like Joshua. Joshua was eventually the leader of Am Yisrael. His grandfather was the leader of Shevet Ephraim. So it tells you, probably guess that Nachbi ben Vovsi wasn't just a nobody in his Shevet. Probably someone, a decision maker. So these things had to be discussed. So it was about the how. However, they came back, and not only did they bring information, they expressed their opinions as to if the conquest should happen. Whereas the rabbi put it, they were told eich, lo ha'im. They're told how, not if. Understand? So that was their problem. They decided to put their 2 cents in the matter of if they should. The if was not in the question. God had already commanded it. This was obligated. This is what God's wanted. It was God's will. They were just supposed to figure out how to do it. It's like you should build a temple. You can figure out now, at least in the Mishkan, it was very clear that God gave specific instructions. You have to use boards of wood covered in gold with silver, base sockets, and the roof should be made out of this triple layer cover, and the exact materials and even the colors were mentioned, right? And the curtain also. The curtain should be red, purple, and blue, and woven with certain designs on it. So they had really no choice what to do with the Mishkan. When it came to the temple, David HaMelech said he was inspired to draw up the plans. So he used cedar wood and stone and gold in certain ways, but it was basically his decision. And when Herod refurbished the temple also, they basically endorsed him, as long as you make it look nice. It doesn't say he used the materials of the Mishkan. He used the best materials he had at the time. And a future temple, we have no prescription, like the Rambam points out. We have no prescription in the halacha or in the book of Yechezkel about how the future temple should be built, the exact materials. That's up to us, right? So we're told to do it, but how to do it, there's some discretion. So my response to what the rabbi said was kind of also impassioned. Why? Because he doesn't hold of going to the Temple Mount and rebuilding the temple yet. Both strictly much against that. It's our thing. We don't go to Harabayas. So I asked him, and what about going to Harabayas? What about rebuilding the temple? That's the same thing. The Torah demands of us to do it. The Rabbanut's job, and by the way, this is another failure of the Rabbanut. Rabbi Bar-Hayim said this. This was the failure of the Rabbanut back in 67. The Rabbanut was not supposed to tell us if we were to go to Harabayas, which they did, and they said no. That was the question they thought was in front of them. The question was, how do we go about using Harabayas as a place of prayer and worship, sacrifice? They were supposed to tell us how. If they really were the Rabbanut, the heirs to the Sanhedrin, they were supposed to tell us how. By the way, this is what I told the now former chief rabbi's secretary. He was asking me about Agadah Pesach. I said, I'm suggesting what should be. If the Rabbanut really is the Rabbanut, it should be telling us how. It should have a gathering of the most qualified scholars to actually lead Am Yisrael and give them direction about how we should be doing this. The whole idea that the Rabbanut or someone else or any other group of rabbis can say, you can't go to the Har Bayis, it's off limits permanently until a miracle happens, is against what God wants. It's against the Torah. God has given us the commandments, and it's our job to figure out how to do it. Now, Sanhedrin's job is to tell us how, not just shave al tasa everything. Make sense? And he answered without irony. He said, well, get this. Rav Nevitzal at the time, almost 60 years ago, purportedly asked Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kook about, okay, what do we do with Har Bayis now? Go to Har Bayis? Rav Nevitzal holds you're not allowed to go to Har Bayis. He's the rabbi of the old city of Jerusalem. Even though everybody around him was going to Har Bayis. All those people in the old city, they live there so they can go to Har Bayis regularly, Rabbi Yisrael Ariel is there, right in the middle, living in the old city. He's the biggest proponent. Rabbi Weber's there. All these people who are big Har Bayis people. So he asked Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kook, and the answer was, he guessed it. What was it? The time is not ripe. That's what they write. Every time they have this is the Mora Mikdash pamphlets. Don't go to our bias because somehow the time is not right. It's different Nevi'as. Somehow or other, when it came to basic Zionism, Divrei Nevi'ut is expression in halacha that someone is saying something that he cannot know. It's a nice way of saying either you're a Navi and you're getting this pronouncement from God, or what you're saying is nonsense. Chagai told you don't build the Beis Mikdash? Yes, if you read Sefer Chagai, the point of Sefer Chagai, which is a short Sefer, is if you're sitting around thinking it's not time to build the Beis Mikdash, then you're wrong because God gave you the commandment. You should have done it yesterday. Yes, that's why the book has been written for posterity, for future generations also to realize. If you're ever sitting around thinking, and also the book of Ezra and Nehemiah is to tell you, if you're ever sitting around thinking, maybe we have to wait for some divine sign to go back to the land of Israel, the answer is no, you were supposed to go back. If you were able to, that means you're supposed to. And God has given you a blessing. Rabbi Bar-Hayim pointed out the Rambam and the Vilna Gaon, by default, we were obligated in the commandments. These Zionist rabbis who came from Rav Kook's school, the first Rav Kook school, knew that we have to try as much as we can to settle the land of Israel and found a state. They got over that hump. Why? Because for many hundreds of years, Jewish people did not have that on the agenda. They even had groups of Jews who said, we're dafka not supposed to do these things. So they had to teach them 100 years ago that, no, you do. So they got over that. But suddenly they get to the next stage, and then they revert to being Haredites, like, oh, I don't know. Mashiach hasn't come yet. I haven't gotten a Navi to tell me specifically to do this, so I'm not going to do it. The time is just not right somehow. Or maybe God gave you the opportunity it is right. So then he said something which actually is true. We're in a time of war. We shouldn't build the Beis Hamikdash. You have to wait for peace. And the answer is because the Torah says, it says in Parshas Re'eh. And it says David HaMelech finally got around to considering building the Beis Hamikdash after God had given him rest from all his enemies around. And it says with regards to the establishment of the sanctuary in Shilo, it was also, they set it up at Shilo. Why? Because all the wars had come to an end.
I don't have any problem with this one on using and building a business.
Yes, exactly. The rabbi said also without irony, we were given three mitzvahs: appoint a king, destroy Amalek, and build the base of Mikdash. So we haven't done that yet. I said, so you're just gonna sit around, oh, I guess putter for the mitzvah. If you don't appoint the king, one, like the Rambam says, king is ideal, but whoever's a stand-in for the king has the din of a king. He said, Navi Melech or Shofet, right? Sometimes we have different leaders. And two, so doesn't mean you're putter, doesn't mean you're exempt from such a thing. And secondly, if you hold of the state of Israel, like Rav Shefty pointed out, so that is a kingship. And we had shalom for a little bit. We had peace, and we missed our opportunity. So now today there's a war. Yeah. Why is there a war? Like the Navi Zechariah said, because you didn't build the base of Mikdash when you had a chance. You squandered it. Okay? So I was surprised by the lack of understanding this. This is what you can see here. Where's my Tanakh? Oh, you have my Tanakh. Look at this progression over here. What happened with the Meraglim? They didn't want to have to keep certain commandments. They were religious people. I pointed out to someone. We suffer from the Erev Rav. We suffer from enemies without. Amalek, right? What does Erev Rav represent? What does Amalek represent? What's their corresponding group today? The Meraglim were Miyuchasim. They were leaders. We can't blame it on Erev Rav. We can't blame it on Amalek. We can't blame it on foreign nations. The Meraglim were our own internal problem with our leadership. Same thing with Korach. Korach and his Ada, they were all big shots. Miyuchasim big shots. How do I know they're Miyuchasim? They're not, lowly people. It says, we know the exact. Well, yeah, and not only that, it says Korach, it says Ben Yitzhar, Ben Kahas, Ben Levi. Miyuchas means if you could trace your line, you know exactly where everybody knows who you are. They could trace you to Yaakov Avinu. So you're a Miyuchas. You're a special person. So too, Dasan Aviram, it says. Dasan Aviram, it says in Parshas Pinchas, and there was the son of Reuven was Palu. Okay? Uvnei Falu Eliyav. Uvnei Eliyav, Nimuel, the son of Aviram. Dasan Aviram, everybody knew they could trace them back all the way to Reuven. They were big shots. They weren't firstborn, but they were big shots. So you have here the Meraglim are the ones who say we don't want to have to keep certain commandments. And then the Parsha goes into something very strange. Look over there. The Parsha says mitzvahs that you're going to get when you go to Eretz Yisrael. It talks about shkagos. Okay? The commandment to bring. This is basically, it belongs in Sefer Vayikra, the next Parsha. The Meraglim in the aftermath. And then we leave the story and we go to what's just halacha. Halacha that could have fit anywhere else. And what is it? It's shkagos, korbanos that they bring only once they get to Eretz Yisrael. And the mitzvah of challah, taking challah from the dough. And once again, that's talking about what? A mitzvah, specifically, Rashi points out, mitzvahs for when you get to Eretz Yisrael. Then we get to the case of Vayu v'nei Yisrael b'midbar. They were in the desert, in the wilderness, and there was a fellow who's being the Chal Shabbos. What's the connection? So we get back to the story. And why is it mentioned Vayu v'nei Yisrael b'midbar? Rashi points out, Al Pidrash, what does it mean? You hear the question? You hear that question? No. I'll repeat the question. There's one story in Sefer Bamidbar. By the way, Sefer Bamidbar is where? It's in the wilderness. That's what the name of the Sefer is. Bimidbar Sinai. Everywhere is Bimidbar this. They're only going to get to Eretz Noshevet when they finally cross the Jordan. Everywhere is a Midbar this. It's the wilderness. Okay. But this story about the Mekoshesh Eitzim is where? Vayu v'nei Yisrael b'midbar. Of all the stories in the entire Torah, which 4 out of 5 books are in the Midbar, this one says, and they were in the Midbar, Bnei Yisrael were in the Midbar, and they found a man gathering sticks. Everything's in the Midbar. Right? When it talked about the Megadef, okay? The Kal Shem Hashem, in Parshas, in Sefer Vayikra, at the end of Emor, was it say? Vayitzei ben Yishai Yisraelit. He went out from the camp. It doesn't say, and Bnei Yisrael were in the Midbar, right? Of course they're in the Midbar. They're stuck in the Midbar for the next 38 years. What does it add? Vayu Bnei Yisrael b'midbar. So here's the suggestion. The Rodlim said, we don't want to have to keep the mitzvahs. We don't want to have to go to Eretz Yisrael and have to start keeping the mitzvahs, basically. Even though the Torah, we know what it says, we have to conquer this land and make it ours and drive out the Canaan and do everything. We're not going to do that. And then God gave his announcement. No, here's the punishment. And then most of the people regretted what they had done. And they're told now it's too late. That's the end of the story. That's the end of the narrative. That gets into the mitzvahs of two batches of mitzvahs that will only come into force when we get to Eretz Yisrael. Why? Like Rashi says, God's telling them, you're going to get to Eretz Yisrael, you're going to have to keep certain mitzvahs. But as long as you're in the midbar, these mitzvahs do not apply. The mitzvahs of the shkagos and many of the other korbanos, and the mitzvahs regarding slaughter, and the mitzvahs regarding taking a portion of the dough and give it to the Kohen is only when you get to Eretz Yisrael. Oh, wait a minute. It says in Sefer Yechezkel that when Am Yisrael was first sent into exile, at least the Judeans, they're in Bavel, they asked of Yechezkel a question, a veiled question, which is almost a kfira. You know what the question was? If a man were to divorce his wife one day, gives her a bill of excision, sends her out. That's it, we're done. He wakes up the next morning, and he's wondering where his breakfast is and why his underwear drawer is missing. You know, where's the laundry? So they asked, if a man divorces his wife and then suddenly expects that he wants his laundry done and his breakfast be ready, can he really have a claim? He divorced her. All bets are off. Right? So they were hinting to the Navi, and the Navi understood this, and Hashem gave them an answer. They're saying, now that God has basically abrogated his covenant with us, he sent us into exile and killed many of us. We're now in Bavel. Do we still have to keep the Torah? All bets are off, right? Good question. Many Jews had this attitude. I remember someone saying, after the Holocaust, they started eating treif. Right? All bets are off. And what's God's response? Like he says to Yeshayahu, I didn't divorce you. This was just a consequence of our relationship. You didn't keep the Torah, so you got a punishment. But you were still completely obligated to the Torah, and I'm still your God. That was God's answer. So over here, you can imagine that there were Jews in the Midbar now. We're saying, now that we've been punished by God, first Tisha B'Av, we're now stuck in the desert. We will not enter the land of Israel, even though that was the whole point. God's giving us commandments for when we get to Eretz Yisrael. He's telling us specifically, when you get to Eretz Yisrael, you're going to have to offer this certain type of sacrifice and do this with your bread and give some to the Kohen also, right? You can imagine Vayu b'nei Yisrael b'midbar. So there's a person Mikoshesh Eitzim. He could have claimed, we're still in Midbar here, and we're going to be stuck in the Midbar. Who cares about Shabbos then? Shabbos was the first mitzvah we got when we left Egypt, right after Kriyas Yam Suf. That's when we got Shabbos, even before we got to Har Sinai. They were told, keep Shabbos, right? And what shouldn't they do on Shabbos? Go out to the field and gather mun. No gathering, no going out and gathering things on Shabbos. So what is this fellow now doing? He's basically going back. He's like, okay, all bets are off. Commandments, none of this stuff. If we've been sentenced like this to die in this wilderness, and we're only hearing about next generations going to have the commandments, so maybe Shabbos is also not on the table anymore because we're stuck in the midbar. We'll have Shabbos when we get there. It's Canaan. And what's the lesson? No, you were given the commandments already. Shabbos you were given already. There's no abrogation of the commandments. Even if you suffer a punishment by God and you're in Gullus, whether in Bavel or stuck in the midbar, you're still in Gullus, you are still completely bound by all the commandments. And that's why the next commandment is, after the Mikoshesh Eitzim was put to death. Why is he put to death? For Chilul Shabbos.
Well, once he put the Chilul Shabbos, he thought there wasn't Chilul Shabbos.
No, he thought, not that, here, if it's shogeg, what makes it a shogeg? He thought it was Friday, or he didn't know this act was a malacha. He knew there's malachas or usr, but this isn't the malacha. He wouldn't say it. He says, when I get to Eretz Yisrael, I won't be able to do this on Shabbos. But now that I'm in the midbar, it's permissible, even though it's Shabbos. You should have known that this is a malacha on Shabbos, because this is the first thing you were told not to do on Shabbos. Go out to the field and gather things. Yeah, that's what he thought Omer Mutter. That's an Omer Mutter. Okay, which is different than a shogeg. Not exactly. When it comes to Shabbos, remember, the shogeg is, remember? Yeah. So if a person just says, "Oh, I thought it's mutter," so it depends on how he says it. Here he says, "I know." Here is his shgaga, if that is the most cardinal means, because he's saying that Shabbos exists in today's Shabbos. I know it has 39 malachas, and this is one of the malachas. Just it doesn't apply to me because I'm stuck in the desert because I've been punished. God divorced us, so to speak. And that's the next lesson. Get some tcheles, get some tzitzis. Remember, all the mitzvos, all the time are enforced. Yes, sometimes you can't keep a certain mitzvah. You're stuck. You can't do the mitzvah. But the mitzvah is eternal. Even Shemitah and Yovel. You can only keep the mitzvah when all of Am Yisrael are on it or in Eretz Yisrael in the right way. It doesn't mean that Shemitah and Yovel disappeared. Right now, we don't have it. That's only the technical reason. It's going to come back. Like the Rambam says, Mashiach comes, all the mitzvahs come back to the way they were. You always have to study them. You have to know they always obligate. And when the opportunity presents itself, you have to keep that commandment. That's what we learned from Parsha Shlach. So I'd like to conclude this with the idea of unfortunate ideas. And I remember reading, one of the scholars wrote that he thinks that something being written, a book or whatever, a discussion, he thought that was unfortunate. It wasn't la halacha.
Why?
I forget what the example was, but I'll give you an example. The idea brought up by Rashi that the Beis Hamikdash should fall from heaven. This week, someone invoked that, trying to convince him, come with us to our bais. So, problem was, he said, I'm waiting for the Beis Hamikdash to fall from heaven. That's, as we said, we spilled a lot of ink about this. Go check it out. Rashi obviously himself didn't even hold of such an idea. He said it in passing in order to make a teretz. But the problem is, this idea that the Beis Hamikdash will fall from heaven is fallen on us so much that some people think it's a fulfilled yavel. So much so that they're going to take only a passive position. We are no longer going to try to build a Beis Hamikdash or think about such a thing because we're waiting for it, right? It became one of the ani mamim, that the Beis Hamikdash will fall from heaven, and therefore I'm not going to try. I'm not allowed to do anything to bring it about, except to keep the random mitzvahs. All right, somehow that will make it fall from heaven, right? So that's an unfortunate idea. I think that perhaps it would have been better if Rashi had just kept this idea to himself and not written it down in his Perush. It was not necessary to be written, but whatever. He felt it was necessary because this idea has had more disastrous effects for Am Yisrael than it has been good effects. That's my feeling. I'd be very wrong about that. It's a meme. His idea of memes.
It's a meme from mimetic and not the mother.
He's the one who coined the term memes. In his case, meme is an element of culture, ideas among humans that spread. Certain memes are very strong, like an idea that just catches on. And it spreads, not necessarily because of who Rashi was, but because the idea has a certain appeal, and everybody repeats it. It has whatever it has. You could analyze why some memes are successful and some are not, why some religious ideas are more successful and some are not. Certain appeal, the way it reproduces. He said it's analogous to the way certain genes take off in the gene pool, okay, through Darwinian selection, not evolution, selection. So certain ideas take off. Another idea which is similar is the idea that you have to stay in exile, the 3 oaths, which my daughter asked me about this week. The 3 shavuot. Lo yalu b'choman, yishbati yadchem b'not Yerushalayim im ta'irim ta'omu et'ava ad shetekpot. It's brought in ksubos at the end. So that became, even though that's, once again, it's obvious, according to the poskim, that there is no such commandment or obligation to stay in Chutz La'aretz and not come to Eretz Yisrael and run a country like the Rambam imagined, right? Rambam poskim what? Like the Shulchan Aruch, you're supposed to live in the land of Israel at all times, right? But that idea, that medrash, taken out of context and briefly misunderstood, became the basis for rabid religious anti-Zionism in the bad way, like stay in Europe and get massacred instead of coming to Palestine type of stuff. The biggest mistake made by European rabbis leading up to World War II and during World War II. So that's an unfortunate idea. And last week we talked about Nekama, the idea that God will get the vengeance, not us. As we pointed out, vengeance in the Torah, the kind that God wants, is when it talks about God, it means God's vengeance through the agency, the medium of Israel. That is, the Jewish people wreak God's vengeance. Yeah, You have to smite. It means when God gets revenge, it means that he has put the sword in King David's hands and allowed him to smite all his enemies. So this idea that we're not supposed to take revenge, we are not supposed to let God do it, passive. Okay, it's not supposed to be us. So basically, all of these ideas create a certain passivity. We're not supposed to build a base. They're supposed to fall from the sky. We're not supposed to move back there to swell. We're supposed to wait for the flying carpets and the Nesher to come and get us, right? So that's a problem. We're not supposed to take vengeance on our enemies. We're supposed to wait for God to strike them down with meteorites and lightning bolts. So these are problems. These are all ideas that create us passive. So I'd like to add to this the idea of discussing the laws of war and ethics. Rabbi Brody wrote a whole book about it. I haven't gotten to read it yet. I think he's actually correct in a lot of regards based on articles and conversations I've had with him. So he is in tune with many of the authors, but the problem is many are not, and maybe there's room to make a mistake. These were not supposed to be questions. The rabbis were supposed to conduct the war. War means, according to the Rambam, for those who didn't understand it yet until this point, war means destroy your enemy without regard to thinking of all these things, collateral damage, civilian casualties, and all these things. The goal of war is and always was, throughout Jewish history, and the halacha demands that the Jewish soldiers destroy the enemy completely and take everything from the enemy. That's what you're supposed to do. The fact that rabbis, starting in the later centuries, actually began asking questions, perhaps we should do something to avoid civilian casualties. Perhaps we should do something, all those other ideas. It's unfortunate that they even got discussed because they missed the point entirely. They were not coming from the right perspective. They had the wrong starting point, and they brought Am Yisrael and others who wanted to be misled into thinking that now there is what to discuss. Perhaps there's considerations should be made, for example, with regards to how we should conduct the war, not use certain weapons, avoid certain acts of destruction. Yes, it's true. The Torah does say that you shouldn't destroy the fruit trees. Why should you destroy the fruit trees when you lay siege? You can use them for your own advantage. What did the tree do? And Yaakov Avinu was afraid, according to one leader, about killing people in war. He had a fear. But then again, that throughout that parsha, Yaakov Avinu had certain fears that perhaps were inappropriate and had to learn to get over because that's not what God wanted him to do. Right? Yeah. So these are all problems. I call these unfortunate ideas because they've made it into Am Yisrael, and now it'll be very hard for us to rid ourselves of these misplaced, these misguided memes. So, how can you write a book about war ethics? We already have a book. You're supposed to crush, kill, destroy. Like they say, kibush, girush, yashvut. Conquer, what? Drive out the enemy, the survivors. Take yashvut. And by the way, you're out to take all their spoils. What's more there to war? That's the way war is always conducted. Now we suddenly have to have all these other considerations